Analogy. Analogy is a type of comparison used to explain something abstract or complex by showing how similar it is to something concrete or easy to understand. Therefore, an analogy may be used when you are trying to explain a difficult concept or give greater emphasis to an explanation. Analogy and comparison. An analogy is slightly different from a comparison. In a comparison between two items, we are equally interested in both items. However, with an analogy, we are only interested in one item and are using the second item mainly to highlight features of the first item. Therefore, for an analogy to be effective, the reader needs to be familiar with the characteristics of the second, easier term. An example of an analogy would be, living here is like living in a goldfish bowl. If we were making a comparison, we would be interested in both the characteristics of where we live and those of the goldfish bowl. However, with an analogy, we are only interested in explaining where we live. We are only using the analogy of a goldfish bowl to make it easier for the reader to understand the characteristics of where we live. Analogy and metaphor. Technically, there is also a slight difference between an analogy and a metaphor. The purpose of a metaphor is mainly to describe something for the reader, whereas the purpose of an analogy is to explain something to the reader. In practice, however, this may be a difficult distinction to make, and an analogy and a metaphor may seem very similar.